Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us this evening on Parent Chat. I am Bonnie McDaniel, a proud member of the Balance in Mind team. Tonight's topic is hanging in there, strategies to support family emotional health. Joining us this evening to discuss this topic is Kristie Neklason. Kristie is the Director of School-Based Services for Youth Eastside Services, and Cailyn Griffith, who is a behavioral support specialist at Youth Eastside Services. Cailyn provides education, prevention, and counseling to Kamaikan and Finn Hill Middle School students. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We hope that you're going to hear a lot of useful information this evening. We also want to encourage you to participate this evening in the webinar. If you have a question, you can post it in the chat and everyone can see it, or you can use the Q&A feature in the toolbar along the bottom of your screen to post questions. And you can either have your name or you can ask us a question anonymously. Tonight we'll hear from Kristie and Cailyn about healthy and unhealthy coping and strategies to support emotional health in your family now. After the conversation, we'll have a little bit of time at the end to answer some of your questions. So now I'm going to hand it over to Kristie. Kristie, how are you doing? Are you hanging in there?
I am hanging in there, Bonnie. Thank you very much. And I wanted to start out tonight setting a little bit of a context, if you'll bear with me, and then we're going to hear a lot of really interesting information from Cailyn and then have a conversation. So the other day I heard a term that was psychological flexibility, and I just thought, aha, that is that's the concept I've been looking for that kind of sums up sort of finding the middle ground and the path as we continue to deal with such challenging situations. And I think that will become more clear through the evening as you hear from Cailyn. To illustrate that concept, I wanted to invite you to kind of experience it in your bodies with me. So when we're flexible in our bodies, of course, we're kind of like, we're upright, we're sturdy, but we can move around with some fluidity. We can change, we can shift gears. We're not locked in. When we're rigid, and so if you're just sitting there, you could even stand up and get the full experience of this, kind of tighten up as tight as you can, kind of all of your muscles, and just sort of squeeze your body like it's going into a vice, and your feet are close together, and your arms like this, okay? So this is kind of rigid. This is the opposite of flexibility. And one thing to know when you're rigid, if you're thinking about it, if a big wind comes along and you are tensed up like that and rigid, what's going to happen? Boom, you're going right over. If you're flexible, you're like that tree moving in the wind. And you don't want to go all the way over to floppy, because floppy is sort of when you're like, and if you're just like that, then you're like, there's that line from the song, are you like a paper bag or a plastic bag? I can't remember now, blowing in the wind, right? It's like if you're in floppy state, that wind just blows you all over the place. You don't have any kind of place where you sort of planted yourself. So thinking about being in that middle place of flexibility, just kind of keeping that sense and teaching yourself almost to call yourself back to it, really noticing when you've gone to the rigidity or when you've gone to the floppy. And it's Wednesday. I have already been in all of those places this week. Right now, I'm pretty much in the flexibility part, but man, I was in that kind of rigidity. And some of you have been with us before and know about Dan Siegel's flipping the lid when your amygdala with all your emotions, which usually sits nicely underneath your prefrontal cortex that has some kind of sense and judgment and reason and can kind of wait to make a response, has just been totally flipped. I've also been in that floppy space where it's like, okay, I'm just done with everything. I just want to curl up in a ball. So I'm not talking about perfection here. I'm not saying, some people get this and some people don't. This is something you really have to kind of work at and just notice kind of as you go through your day to day. And it could be a really useful concept to call your kids back to, like, you could have it be a family kind of thing, like, ooh, look a little rigid there, what's going to happen when the wind comes, or, ooh, floppy, we're all floppy today, aren't we? What shall we do about that? Or kind of how can we get back to our flexibility? So I want you to be thinking about that concept. And another thing is too, when you're flexible, you can't really be judgmental. The judgmental of like the judgy stuff of yourself, your kids, each other, that kind of goes. Humor becomes a possibility. This is a good place to be when you're dealing with kind of unrelenting stress and difficulty, which has sort of been the norm for everybody through this year in their own individual ways. The other thing I want to remind people is that this is part of a series at Balance in Mind, like Washington School District, YES, Public Health, NAMI, the Kirkland and Redmond Police, and Public Health, Children's Hospital, UW, have all been partnering together to bring, to really explore youth, families, emotional health, mental health, substance abuse and prevention, and kind of creating safe environments. And so tonight we're looking at really kind of emotional wellness. And we can talk about kind of how that can differ from mental health if you'd like later on. But I want for us to turn to Cailyn now and hear some really useful things that she has to say about kind of coping and coping as a family together. Cailyn?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. And something that I just want to say right off the bat, well, a couple things that I want to say right off the bat, is we are here talking about the whole family. We are not just here talking about the kids and the family. We're here talking about you guys as well. So as I'm going through this, I just want to remind you, I might be phrasing things in terms of working with youth because that is my background. And I would challenge you to turn all these questions inwards too. Think about your own coping. Think about the way that you've been handling things as well, because you are definitely a part of your family system, and your health matters too. So as obvious as that may be, the other thing is I want to thank Val for throwing this in the chat. Just so you guys all know I haven't joined one of these parent chats before. I'm a very casual presenter and I love to interact with people. So if you have questions as I'm going through any of my slides, feel free to either throw a question in the Q&A in the chat. I've given Bonnie and Kristie permission to interrupt me in case questions come up. I'd rather talk about questions that you have while I'm still on those slides, because I feel like that just creates a much more dynamic conversation. So feel free to ask me those questions. If not, we will also be getting to questions at the end as well. And I'm going to cut myself off to make sure we save time for those too. But let's get started. So the first thing that I just wanted to cover is what is even the point of coping? And I think in the mental health world, I have a lot of these conversations where coping is not made distinct enough from solving a problem. A lot of the time people assume if they are coping correctly, then they are no longer distressed about whatever emotions they are coping with. And that is simply not the case. In the mental health realm, at least with DBT informed treatment, there are 4 ways to address any given problem. The first is to suffer. And as odd as that might sound, suffering is a passive choice and it's still a choice. It's a choice to do nothing else. And so in some cases, when we make those choices to suffer, what that tells me is we either don't know what options we have to feel better about something, or it just really feels like those options are out of our grasp.
Cailyn, I think I'm going to just jump right in with your invite. Sometimes suffering is the thing to do. I'm just thinking about grief and loss and where people have, had many different types of losses, from a loss of loved ones to losses of jobs to losses of school, dreams, all kinds of things. And a certain amount of suffering to that is a very normal and healthy thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I am not trying to say any of this to imply that you should beat yourself up over suffering or anything like that, but suffering is just a part of life. And sometimes it's not avoidable. And even though we might not like that we feel like we're suffering emotionally, it is a natural process. And with those natural processes, those things decrease over time. So if we notice that we are really just suffering with a problem and can't find any other solution, it might just be that there is no solution in the traditional sense. And it really is making your way through it.
Yeah.
The next way to address a problem is to avoid. I am sure many of us have experience with that. My quick example of a way to avoid a problem is procrastination. Those of you that have students in the audience know what this is like. I'm sure those of you that work maybe know a little bit of what this is like too. But avoiding problems is a great way to get things off our plate in the moment. It helps de-stress us. It's something that makes it feel like the things we have are a little bit more manageable in the moment as well. And if you know anything about stress, you can't be too stressed or else you're really not going to get anything done. It really is about maintaining what Kristie was talking about, that difference between rigidity and flexibility. And sometimes we have to avoid those things that would really push us way too far into that red zone. Next, we get into coping. Coping is what I turn to when you either can't solve the problem, those solutions don't exist for you in that moment, the solutions are still coming, but they're not there yet, or your emotions are too high and too escalated to be able to effectively solve the problem. And coping is a really, really, really great choice. And it requires sometimes that presence of mind of knowing, hey, this might not solve my problem. And I'm going to spend my energy doing this anyway, because any little bit that I can do right now to not feel so bad is going to be energy that I can keep later as well. And finally, the most obvious way to address a problem is to solve that problem, finish it, get it off our plate, check the thing off the box, and get moving with our lives. And I think just opening up the discussion for a little bit more in like terms of ways that you can have a problem and interact with that thing, other than solving it, gives you a little bit of that self-compassion and a little bit of that peace of mind that you are still functioning properly. You're still doing the things you got to do. You are still being a good human. You're just doing things about life that you got to do. And sometimes life isn't always super easy, neat in a super perfect puzzle.
It surely is. And some problems aren't ours to solve. I mean, there's a lot of external situations that we don't have much, if any, control over. And so sometimes I think that goes back to what you said in the first place about that feeling of passivity and powerlessness. We're not powerless over it, but we need to recognize kind of what side of the street is the problem on. And if it's not ours, what can we do on our side of the street?
Absolutely. All right. Thinking about coping. The other thing about coping is not all kinds of coping are appropriate in any given moment. And I actually like to think of coping in terms of 6 different categories. The first is one that I am hoping is very familiar to all of you guys listening today, but distractions. That's Netflix, that's video games, that's talking to a friend, that's just going outside, taking a walk. That's every time you go to the fridge when you're working from home, trying to see if there's something new in there, even though you just checked 5 minutes ago. And I know some of you can kind of relate to that because I do that all day. Distractions are what we do to get our mind on something else. Sometimes our minds are just too overwhelmed by what we've got going on. And giving your mind that space and that permission to focus on something else really does take that pressure off a lot of the time. Next, we've got self-care, and that's probably what most people typically think of when we think of coping. That's your classic example of like taking a bath, take a shower, eat your favorite meal, treat yourself to something, buy yourself a treat, go out to your favorite restaurant, deliver your favorite dessert to your house. That is my favorite one recently. But do things that make you feel good. Do things that you know you like, and figuring out what ways you can kind of just support yourself and give yourself those little pleasant things throughout your day is really helpful sometimes, even if it doesn't directly address the thing that we're distressed about. Next, we've got grounding. This is great for folks that experience a lot of worries or anxiety. Grounding is the technique that gets you back linking with your physical sensations. So your touch, your taste, your sense of smell, your sense of like where you are in the world. Are your feet touching the ground? This is something that would breed a lot of like tip skills. So like doing exercise, that is a big grounding technique. And it's something that a lot of people use for coping without realizing it's coping. I also tell folks, if you go outside ever and just take a breath of fresh air, that is also a grounding technique. And it's just a very different kind of coping in that it really hacks into your physical sensations, even if it doesn't really interact with your environment that much. Next, we've got thought challenges. Those are my personal favorite because I am a therapist. But thought challenges are all about analyzing the things that you say to yourself, the things that you say about your environment, and really seeing what of those statements are really that helpful and which of those statements are really accurate. Because a lot of the times when we focus with like depression or anxiety and we really experience those things, sometimes that can really infect our thinking patterns. It can make us think that everything is in absolutes, in black and white. And thought challenges really help with get that nuance back into your world and back into the way that you think about stuff.
And you know what, Cailyn, a thought just occurred to me when you were talking about that is how much of kind of these beliefs or these constructs that we receive or bombarded with throughout the day. I'm just thinking about even in terms of kind of the pandemic and impacts on people. You hear, whether it's headlines or it's kind of news stories where it's like, oh, this is setting a whole generation back. Will they ever recover from this? Children's mental health is in tatters. The economy is, it's can be so kind of black and white, so negative, so kind of overwhelming. And I really have found myself like pushing back on those, like, well, wait a second here. There have been some kinds of positives and learnings. Nobody ever guaranteed us a simple life without any difficulties and problems. And how can we kind of embrace this? I really refuse to believe that a whole generation has been blighted because they had to struggle for a year. Sometimes that actually is what makes a generation. So, etc.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great observation. And just piggybacking on your comment about the news, we've all learned that the news really, really focuses on negative things. And that's not actually super reflective of our lives. Same kind of thing happens in our thoughts. The news is actually a great, great metaphor for the way that we think and the way our society just develops our brains. We are taught to look for the bad things because we want to prevent those things from happening to us. That just makes sense. And it's something that breeds a lot of anxiety, unfortunately, too, because we are learning that we need to focus on the bad things. And sometimes those good things don't really carry as much weight when we really consider them. I've got another one on here for emotional release. And this one is sometimes a controversial one. Yelling, screaming, crying. Whenever I talk with students about those, their first impression is like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing those. Actually, yelling, screaming, crying are the most natural releases your body can have. I am a big fan of crying. I think it is so, so important in life. Throwing a ball, getting that energy out. It's the runner's high, that natural endorphin rush by doing exercise. Anything that you can do, again, thinking about your physical body to kind of let the steam out of the top. I'm picturing a tea kettle screaming on your stove. And just getting those emotions out, letting that pressure lift, and then giving you kind of that headspace again to think about, oh, let's touch back in with what I've got to work with. Okay, I'm ready to go. We can get this again.
So Cailyn, being a parent, now my daughter is grown and independent, but I well recall when she was young, and I'm thinking about your comments earlier about there's sort of a time and a place for different styles of coping. So I'm thinking about like yelling, screaming, and crying, kind of having a fit in the privacy of your own room when you're kind of like, okay, I need to have a meltdown, or it's like, okay, kiddo, you need your meltdown before your nap. Sorry, we got that far today, but okay. Versus, in the aisle at the parking, the grocery store or in the parking lot or something like that, or smashing windows and things rather than bubble wrap. And I'm going to bring that back to kind of that flexibility and that flexible stance. So if you're the parent in that situation, you can sort of model, okay, you've gone either totally to the flop or to the rigidity, but I'm not stuck there. So I can kind of have some flexibility to help you out with that, like saying, not here, not now. So we're going to leave. Then you can kind of get your feelings out in a safe place, or something to that effect where you're kind of helping them shape that.
Absolutely. Especially since you mentioned it earlier, that the example of flipping your lid. I think emotional releases are great examples of things that happen right at the end when your lid is kind of flipped. control is maybe kind of taken out of your hands. And those are kinds of the reactions that just kind of happen. So that is a great point as the listeners in this room, if you're thinking about your family members who might sometimes have those moments of emotional release, how can you help support them in ways that you are coping? Help showing them, oh, here's how you can have an emotional release. Here's how it doesn't impact, at least negatively, the other areas of your life or the other people in your life. And here's how you can maybe manage that and feel better and start using those other coping mechanisms too, once that kind of energy starts coming down.
And
Doable.
planning ahead,
Yes.
having that conversation when people are relatively calm. Child, parent, ooh, this is a bad combination. You would definitely want to have it at least like, everyone's down except for one if you're the parent, sort of. I mean, there are those times I think we have to suck it up a bit, and we are the adult. And we may know we have our times when we need to go have our tantrum and what that can look like, but we need to have a little bit more of that control and ability to stay in that middle flexible place.
Yeah. My last one on this slide is giving back. This is sometimes helpful for some people. Again, not always appropriate in the moment. It might not help, or it might not be accessible in the moment, but that's helping someone else, living to your values, volunteering, joining a cause, random acts of kindness. Those things that make us feel like contributing and helpful members of our communities. Because that is a really, really important part. Humans are social beings. We need that reciprocal communication and engagement to feel good about ourselves and to really measure ourselves and where we stand in society. So sometimes that giving back and looking outside of ourselves is really, really helpful. And just to bring back what Kristie and I have been chatting about as we've been going through this slide, I really like to encourage folks to sit down with the people in their families and just chat about what different categories you have coping mechanisms that really fit the bill in, because these are not all appropriate in any given moment. And we need some things in each of these categories to be a whole functioning person. These are all things that are helpful skills, even when we're not actively trying to cope with something. So these are all things to really develop a little bit more and really have a plan for. And like Kristie mentioned, talking about these when everyone's maybe a little bit calm and planning ahead for those crisis moments is really advantageous a lot of the time. And some of these conversations can be really fun and creative.
And when you're doing that, and I'm sorry about that echo if you can hear that, it's annoying to me. When you're doing that, you're calm, you're together, you're talking about this, you're saying, yeah, sometimes this is helpful to me. And yeah, sometimes I find myself, kind of on the way to flipping my lid. And, so you're modeling self-awareness, you're modeling options and choices. And while you're doing that, you're building your relationship and your connection with your children, whatever age they are. Now, it's great if you started when they were little. And again, there is no perfect parent-child relationship. There is no perfect family. There is no family where, we are so close and we never are super annoyed with each other and those kinds of things. Doesn't exist. Get it out of your mind. On a spectrum, but really key and really the most important thing is maintaining the connection and that relationship and putting time into that so that there's just time where we're connecting with each other. And that's really what we're doing. And so everything else is kind of secondary to that, right? And maybe we have kind of a tense connection, but we're going to really work to include that respect and listening back and forth and, some love, even if it isn't that kind of effusive or necessarily warmth or doesn't come real naturally, because we're all very different that way. So you can't just have those things, but maintaining that connection, building the relationship, really a critical component.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is in the moment, if your child is having an emotional crisis and really just needing some coping mechanisms, how awesome would it be to be like, oh, we've had this conversation. Here's some techniques that I know might work in this moment. And these are the things that my child has already shared with me work for them. Why don't I suggest these things for them? And that kind of moment of clarity or that voice of reason while they're having trouble kind of getting their tether back to reality can be really, really helpful for them too. And it might give you a lot more power and control over navigating that situation, even in just understanding what's going on in their experience and in their perspective too. My next slide talks a little bit more about appropriateness of when coping happens. And first off, I just want to say coping is a spectrum. It goes from the less healthy end to the more healthy end. There is no such thing as just good or just bad coping. And it really has to do with how it's going to impact functionality. What other areas of our life is this coping mechanism going to impact? And is it going to help in this moment? My funny example for this is like, you know what? If you're in the middle of a test and you're really anxious, breathing skills are going to be awesome. There are very, very few scenarios where breathing skills are going to lead to bad things, right? And what if you are not in the middle of the test? What if you are in the middle of a field and there's a cow running at you? Weird example, I know, but sometimes it's helpful to learn with these. In that moment, I really would not want you to just stop and be like, I need to square breathe. 4 in, hold for 4, 4 out. No, that cow is going to be right up on you, right? In that moment, you are coping with stress indeed, but maybe running away is going to be a better, fight or flight might be a better thing to do. Just running might be a better thing to do. There's your exercise, right? Getting out of that field, maybe not bothering the cows is also maybe a good thing to do. But that serves my example. Even those really, really good coping mechanisms aren't going to work in some scenarios. So you need those things that are going to work in other scenarios too. Along with those other things that typically tend to fall pretty solidly on that green end are growth mindset, doing things that help build your skills, doing things that help build your personal sense of value, asking for help, reaching out to other people, supportive people that you think are helpful, that are listening to you, that know you and care about you. Very rarely are those things going to go bad. And sometimes those things aren't accessible. So even if they are so good and they are perfect for the moment, if they're not accessible, we simply need to choose something else. Getting into that kind of yellow zone where it still can be green, it can definitely tip toward orange, is watching TV, video games, all other kinds of distractions that you can think of. Thinking about that orange side, isolation. I don't know about the other introverts out there. I am definitely an introvert, and I am not just talking about those moments that you need to recharge. I'm talking about when you are feeling so sad, so low, so down that you don't want to see anyone. It's too much energy to go out. It's too much energy to like talk to anyone or really be yourself or anything like that. In some small moments, in like a night at a time or so, that is perfectly okay. That is your choice. That is something to choose from. And that is, it might be the thing that's effective in that moment. And we're choosing to isolate every single day for months on end. Ultimately, that is not going to get us where we need to get in terms of just feeling better. That coping doesn't do anything to really change the pattern. And unfortunately, with isolation, it kind of sets the pattern where we kind of get used to doing that. And then we choose that more and more often. I added swearing in this section as well, just because it is something that a lot of youth are not supposed to be doing and can get them in trouble. I do want to say that along with the information that there have actually been studies that show that swearing is actually a really, really good way to deal with emotional distress. Folks that were allowed to swear in one subject group and folks that were not allowed to swear in the other group, the folks that swore after engaging with a difficult task actually felt better about their completion rates of that task than folks who weren't allowed to do that. So to a certain extent, those words occasionally will help blow off that steam. Again, thinking about emotional releases, right. And it's in that orange zone. It's not appropriate in a lot of contexts. Right. A lot of the people in our lives, it might start ruptures in our relationships if we swear at people a lot or swear in general a lot, or it might get us in trouble at school. So it's not a great coping mechanism. It does help for some people.
Yeah. And I know you're talking about swearing in terms of using words to let out things, not swearing at people, which is a very different kind of behavior. That's where you're sort of being assaultive to others. So it's different to say expletive, like that, or saying, to somebody else. So definitely drawing that distinction. And I was to say, like the swearing thing, that's a little bit of kind of one of my little red flags. So if I find myself going that way, I'm like, okay, I'm moving into that rigid zone and I'm going to kind of be snapping or blowing my lid here. So, how do I move myself over again? And quite honestly, throughout days or weeks, I'm moving back and forth. I'm just having that awareness to kind of go, oh, moving that way. Ooh, a little bit too much of that. Let's scooch over here, in a very gentle kind of way with myself. And then I try to do that with and for other people in my family, in my world as well. Not always successful with that, obviously. Isolation, you mentioned feeling sad and depressed. I also have seen a lot of this with anxious kids, and also a lot of kind of kids who this is the way they're finding safety and control. And so back to those kind of media messages about like the virus, the virus, the virus, danger, 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 retreat, retreat, retreat. Well, I mean, a lot of kids are just, that is how they're doing that, is that they're going kind of in here and then they're kind of holding in their little stasis in that. And, that's not entirely a good thing, but I want to normalize that and kind of understand that under the circumstances that's happening. And maybe we can talk a little bit later about kind of some strategies to help kids who are in that.
I love that. That is such an important point, because ultimately, if your child especially is resorting to these coping mechanisms, especially on that like kind of darker orange, red zones, your child is coping, and those are also warning signs. Those are the things that you as a parent can take notice of that tell you, hey, my child is not doing so well. If they are falling to those coping mechanisms and those yellow and green ones aren't sprinkled in there too, they are maybe dealing with something that feels really heavy, or that those green ones really aren't helping with anymore. And that's really a point where maybe they could use some more help. I also ended up on here with those red zones: lashing out, self-harm, substance use. Again, those are big warning signs. And the person who is resorting to those coping mechanisms oftentimes is trying to cope. And oftentimes, especially with youth, they probably already know we don't like that they're choosing those things. So approaching those things again as warning signs, as reasons that you should start showing, oh, I care about you. I want to talk to you about those things. These are the reasons why I don't like that you're choosing them, and making sure you're coming at it from a place of caring and compassion and knowing that they're trying, and they just need some more help.
And that those are often good times to get input from others. So for example, if you think about the thermometer, and I'm thinking about kind of old fashioned, temperatures going up is red. And so it's like, oh, and if someone had a fever and they had it for an hour or two, okay, it passed. And Cailyn talked about that earlier, that if things decrease over time, probably that's a natural kind of part of suffering and we don't have to worry about it too much. But if it's locking in, and sometimes you got to be careful, because with some of those things, kids know that you're going to freak out about them and they want to either protect you or they want to protect their ability to have those behaviors to cope. So they're going to hide. So you may see one instance of substance use, one of self-harm, or one where there was some kind of just really out of character, lashing out kind of behavior. And you might think, that might just be the tip of the iceberg. And these are good times to consult a professional, somebody who's going to work on some very similar things that you are. But if you're listening to Cailyn, I'm thinking, wow, I would love to have Cailyn talking to my daughter. And my daughter did talk to therapists. She had a lot of anxiety that she's coped with. And I was very grateful for that, because as her parent, sometimes my worry and concern could get in the way. And I felt like she just needed something more. And then I needed some coaching. And it was very, very helpful. So thinking about that, if you're in that red zone, it's kind of like, that's like the temperature's up. We would call the doctor, temperature's up. Maybe it's time to kind of get some additional kind of helping, whether it's the behavioral health or the school counselor person at school, or if it's one of the community agencies, private practice person, whoever it may be, but just considering that, even for a consultation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have a question in the Q&A. I don't know if Bonnie, if that was what you're about to tell me, but since we're on this slide, I'm definitely going to answer this real quick. The question is, why is keeping busy a less healthy coping mechanism? And I love that you noticed that. It's a great question. The reason why is because I saw that as an expansion of distractions a little bit, because I find oftentimes, especially when students or I myself am keeping myself busy, not giving myself time to really think or just sit and process, sometimes that might indicate avoidance of feeling those emotions or avoidance of having to confront those emotions. It might mean that whatever is going on in their head is just so painful or so distressing or distracting that they really just, you know what? Nope, I'm going to shove that off. So sometimes, not always, sometimes keeping busy is a very good thing. Like I keep myself busy too. But if you notice that this person is out of character keeping themselves busy, or they're throwing a lot of energy into one thing and not paying attention to their other things, maybe that's a time to pay attention. Or maybe that's when things are getting less healthy and their other responsibilities maybe are taking a hit. Anything to add on that question, Kristie?
Well, I was just going to say, stay out of the judgment zone, either with yourself or with others, right? It's just kind of noticing and then reflecting on it, as Cailyn says. And so there is nothing in and of itself wrong. It's just the degrees. And so how is it functioning for you? And so you kind of think about like terms like workaholic and people who can never relax and other things like that. And that's just taking a toll on them, because when you're sort of in that, you're repressing emotion and doing that instead of being able to kind of feel it. And we do need to have certain things present in order to feel emotions, and to be able to kind of freely do that, we need to feel like we have some safety. We need to feel that sense of connection to others. We need to feel like, we're not going to be attacked if we make ourselves vulnerable. We need to kind of have some hope that things are going to change. I mean, there's just a lot of different factors in there that allow us that kind of healthy moving through emotions. I mean, a lot of emotions, and kind of when you talk about trauma, that's a lot of times what happens with trauma is that it's so overwhelming in the moment that we do go into this kind of full-on avoidance in all respects, whether it's keeping busy, I never have time for that, or it's like all of those kinds of things together so that we avoid ever feeling anything. Then what happens is that our brain and our body cannot process the emotions and the components of that and move them through from the past to the present, from the present to the past. And they get stuck as if they were happening over and over again, and we're having to continuously put out that energy to suppress them. And so it's just noticing what's going on here with this. And, if it's an occasional thing, or if it's sort of, I don't know, it's not disrupting my life too much. And I know Cailyn's going to talk about this next. So then maybe it's okay.
You are right. I am going to talk about that next. This is our next kind of dimension when we talk about coping. And this is going to be maybe the helpful piece for our audience listening about assessing how someone is coping at home. Is it working or is it enough? And really what it comes down to is functionality. I know you can all read, everyone that's sitting here listening, so I'm not going to read these questions to you, but I just threw a couple of thoughts out here in each of these dimensions just to consider. So how is their social functioning? How is their ability to talk to their friends? Are they still reaching out to them? Do they feel like their friends know who they are? Do you feel like your friends know who you are? Are you still talking to them? Is your coping enough that you've been able to include your friends or your social connections in it? How is your physical functioning? Eating, sleeping, appetite? Are you showering regularly? Has that taken a dive? Are you able to dress for the weather? I know it's very cold outside right now. Are you going outside in a t-shirt and shorts, or are you actually putting on a scarf and a jacket? Are you doing the things that you need to do to take care of your body? Managing responsibilities. How is school? How is work doing? What are ways that you've noticed productivity has been impacted? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Are you feeling like you're more stressed than you normally are? What about feelings of burnout? Are you feeling like the minute you get to school or work, you're just tired? Or are you feeling energized throughout your day still? And lastly, ability to take care of oneself. And this is kind of the one that's the most abstract in my opinion, but are you doing things that are making you concerned about them? Or is someone doing things that's making you concerned about them? Are they engaging in risky decision making? Are they going out in the middle of the night? Are they starting to run away? Substance use, self-harm, exposing themselves to unsafe situations. And that can be the whole gambit of things. And again, this is where that red zone and kind of orange zone might show up. especially if those coping mechanisms that they're using are having impacts on other areas of their lives in negative ways.
And Cailyn, relevant to that, there's a couple of questions. So
Yeah.
these two are related. So one, how can you help a teen take a first step towards asking for help? And then the other is, what if your teen really doesn't want you, the parent, to help and guide them or help them develop kind of a, a care plan? What are some strategies that you could suggest?
One strategy is modeling. As simple as that sounds, it's making sure that you are telling them or showing them in any way that you can, hey, here are the ways that I know to take care of myself. These are the things that I make sure to pay attention to, and this is what I do and what works for me. It would be awesome if you would do those same things. Or have you ever thought about that? Asking them those questions. For teenagers who want to take the first step and don't think they're doing so well, I think it's really as simple as making sure they feel heard, validating whatever their emotions are. And the advice that I give all across the board whenever you're talking to a teen, or anyone for that matter, is that feelings are always true. No matter how your teen feels, those feelings are accurate, they are valid, they match whatever their perspective is. And that's really where the rub is. Their perspective might not fit the facts, especially when it comes to conflicts in the family, especially when it comes to breaking rules or anything like that. They might not fit the facts of the situation, like black and white, the truth or not truth, but the feelings that they're experiencing are there for a reason. So just letting them know, hey, I see that you're feeling this way. I see why you might be feeling that way. It matters to me that you feel that way. Again, no matter what the facts are, and I want you to feel better. What are things that we can do to move you towards getting support? And sometimes, unfortunately, for teens, that means they might not want to go to a parent. So if that's the case, one, I will just say, don't take that personally. That is not against you as a person or any of the love that you have shown your child. Sometimes that is just the way teens react to growing up. Their friends are often the first line of defense, the first person that they go to because they feel like their friends understand them the most. And really what it takes sometimes for building that relationship is being like, okay, I recognize that maybe I am not the person you want to talk to in this moment. Here is when I do want you to come to me. And these are matters where it is important. So life or death, when they're in trouble, things like that. If any of you guys were listening to our forum the other day on just like what you need to know, it's that no matter clause that Susie Kroll was talking about, just giving them that no matter what clause, and letting them know you will always be there for them if they do want to turn to you. And for now, if they don't, here are the other resources that they can go to, whether that be Teen Link, whether that be their school counselor, whether that be their BHSS. All of the middle schools in Lake Washington have a behavioral health support specialist. That's who I am. And all of the comprehensive high schools have a BHSS as well. And most of the high schools should have an evergreen social worker who is one of those people that your children can go to. When in doubt, ask your school counselor for what resources are out there for teens. But kind of giving that flexibility and really letting your teen feel like they can have some control over how they get help can be really powerful.
And sometimes, I'm sorry about that. Sometimes that can be as simple as saying, all right, I've noticed this. It concerns me as your parent. I feel like we need some help because I'm going to get rigid because of my fear or whatever, and I'm going to have a hard time staying in the flexible place. So you can choose, you can talk to this person, you can talk to this person, you can talk to this person, or you can call here, but you have to do one of those. And really, draw that line, because there are sometimes like with a youth, I mean, even a teen's health, there's a certain point at which you don't listen anymore to, no, I'm fine. Go away, leave me alone, or, however loud and horrible that might be, it's like, nope, sorry, we really got to get some help here. And we're going to do that. We're just going to hang in and we're going to do that. And I also want to kind of loop back to that idea about the importance of the connection and the relationship again. And so if you're finding that there's a lot of this around your concerns about their health, is trying to create those opportunities where you can just be side by side together, doing something, watching a silly YouTube video, you know, driving somewhere in the car, you know, whatever it might be, where you can kind of take the stress out of that, build up kind of some of that goodwill with them. And then in that same kind of spirit, be able to just say, hey, I've noticed this and this. I'm concerned about it. I think there's some things that we could do as next steps. You know, I'm thinking maybe this might be going on with you, and I'm open to talking about it. You're not going to be in trouble. I just think we need to kind of deal with it. Saying sometimes when I'm experiencing this, this is what's going on. Sometimes when other people are experiencing that. So you're putting it out here. You're not saying, are you, you know, and kind of being in their face about it. You're just sort of speculating like, you know, sometimes when people are having certain experiences or emotions, you know, or when they're behaving this way, that's what's going on. And I'm just wondering, you know, maybe that's going on with you. Maybe I'm wrong. You know, I don't know. But here's what I want you to know about that. So modeling, I think great. Okay, I'm getting help for myself. I'm doing this. Coming alongside, tending to the connection and the relationship, stating your concerns. And when things are in that red zone continuously, it's like, no, we need to get help. And that's going to happen.
Absolutely. I do see one last question, but I'm curious. Human moment. I don't remember what my last slide has on it. Let's see. Oh, so real quick, just to address this last question, where can a teenager new to the school make friends during COVID? That is a very hard question, unfortunately, right now. I think one of the main ways is like if there are any clubs at the school that they can be a part of, if they can join those, building those like relationships with teachers so that they know who to go to and who to hang out with like at school next year can really help just with like loneliness and that touchstone into class. But in terms of just like making friends at school, that is a really, really tough question. I don't know. Kristie, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think it's to find out what is happening at your school. So maybe really talking to either a teacher that you know or the school counselor for your teen, or even one of the administrators. But I know some schools have been really intentional about having kind of social circles and setting up opportunities like that, that might be kind of those clubs or things, but sometimes they were just like, oh, here are 5 different kind of circles that you could join, and they kind of have loose topics and things like that. And some schools have a lot of that going on, and some don't have very much at all. I think out of those conversations with some of the adults might also come, hey, you know, I think I could introduce your child to so-and-so. It seems like they might get along. And so kind of something informal like that. Or if there was somebody that your child had said, oh, you know, I really like this person, and that, you know, kind of doing the extension of what we might have done in, you know, or they might have done themselves in kind of more normal face-to-face times. Well, hey, let's get together. So how can I help you arrange kind of some hangout time, even if it's on the Zoom or on Teams or whatever on the computer. But definitely a challenge. That's been a big impact on kids who like started in the 9th grade or who started in the 6th grade and those transitional years, especially.
Or who moved too. Yeah, new schools, new districts. It's not a time to be a new student and trying to get to know your classmates, which is one of the really, really, really tough things about this year for students. Which kind of loops into this final slide that I have for you all tonight. Let's not forget the pandemic. This chart is an image taken from, I know it's likely smaller on your computer than it is on mine. It's taken from the Washington State Department of Health statewide high-level analysis of forecasted behavioral health impacts from COVID-19, the January 2021 update. That is a very, very long title just to say that folks who are very smart at the Department of Health in Washington State have taken trends that they've noticed from previous pandemics and charted out what they kind of expect the timeline to look like for us in terms of behavioral health. So on the slide, you can see Washington as of January 28th, 2021 is super at this low point. And I just want to acknowledge sometimes it doesn't really quite feel like we're really that low compared to last time this year. Now that we are 1 year in, I have noticed that quite a lot of people have greatly habituated to being in pandemic times. We are used to not going out at night. We are used to just staying in. We are used to doing remote learning to an extent. We might not love it, but we're kind of getting our grips on things. We're kind of used to working from home. We're kind of used to doing all this stuff, right? Like it's kind of a new normal. That's resilience. That is your brain coming up with the defenses that it needs to be okay right now. And if you are not feeling resilient, it is okay to not be okay. We are all still in the middle of a global pandemic. We are all missing our friends. We are all more lonely than normal. We are all grieving losses right now, whether that's jobs, people, what have you, places in life that we've been to or places that we miss, people that we miss, people that are still kind of in our lives but are far away that we don't get to connect with in the same way. There are a lot of things going on in our world that we still have to cope with. So if you are feeling like you are not doing okay, that is maybe a time to reach out for help too. And I just wanted to end there, create that moment of self-compassion for all of us listening and just check in like, hey, we are still dealing with some very, very big things, even if it doesn't feel like that day to day anymore.
And I liked the "and" that you had though too, which was "and."
All of the ands.
We have been really resilient, us and our children and our families as units. Like I said, none of that perfection stuff doesn't exist. And we're still, I mean, we're open, we're here, we're discussing it, we're all trying to, creatively and flexibly make those adjustments as we go and kind of stay in that flexible space. So, Bonnie, do we have time for a final question or we?
Yeah, we have a minute or two if there's anyone else who would like to type a question in the chat or type it into the Q&A.
All right. I don't see one, and I wanted to ask Cailyn to share about an opportunity that's upcoming to sort of learn coping skills and kind of expand your toolkits, both you and your youth.
Yes, so we, our BHSS team, myself and one of my colleagues, Delaney, not near us, are putting together a webinar series. It's going to be 16 weeks long, Thursdays at 4:30, going to be an hour long. And we are adapting the DBT Steps A curriculum for doing DBT in school with students into a webinar series. So we've taken out all of the skills that we think are really, really, really important to the DBT curriculum. And each week we're gonna just share about how to learn that skill, how to practice that skill, examples that, yes, I can absolutely share what DBT is. DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. For those of you who are not huge psych nerds like I am.
It's almost worse when you say it though.
I know, dialectics is kind of what we were just talking about with that both and. Two things can exist at once. I really like sleeping in and I'm a morning person. Those two things exist at once and sometimes they cause conflict, and accepting both parts of myself is sometimes really helpful. I'm sure you can think of so many other examples for how that both and can really work. But dialectical behavior therapy is a very, very, very awesome treatment. I myself find it so helpful in my life. I think it is, of many treatments, one of the many that like anyone can benefit from, no matter where you are on the scale of mental health. It talks about mindfulness in particular, so building that mindfulness of emotions and being able to build that control back in dealing with your emotions rather than your emotions controlling you. Also as well, distress tolerance. So when we are in that crisis moment, how can we choose coping mechanisms that really work for us? Kind of what we were talking about today. Then we've got interpersonal effectiveness. So making sure that we are paying attention to the reciprocal nature of our relationships, the ways that we are giving and taking, and recognizing the ways that our relationships sometimes maybe tip towards that unhealthy end. I think those lessons are so helpful for our young people to learn because otherwise they learn that in very painful ways. And the last one that we've got is, what is the last one? Do you remember, Kristie?
Interpersonal.
That's the fourth one. I skipped one.
Mindfulness, emotional regulation, distress tolerance.
Emotion regulation. That's it. I missed it. That one always blends in for me. But learning to regulate emotions. So when those things come on, before we even get to that crisis moment, what we can do with those.
Yeah.
So
these are social emotional skills that we're talking about. So we're not doing a therapy group or a therapy program. We've taken the skills that they teach within that for social emotional wellness, and it's going to be presented in a kind of like a classroom, but a very engaging kind of classroom style, as you can tell from Cailyn's presentation tonight. And you can come one time, you can come all 16 times, you can come with your kid, you can share the link with the kid. So check back to either the Balance in Mind website. We'll have the link. We don't have it up yet. We're hoping to start next week. And or the Youth Eastside Services, our webpage will also have it. So you can kind of check back. And it's developed in cooperation with the Lake Washington School District for the community. So there is no cost to that. We're really excited about being able to bring that to you. And we're looking at secondary students and really any parent or adult, but middle and high schools for the students. Back to you, Bonnie.
All right, thank you so much, Kristie and Cailyn, for being with us tonight and sharing your thoughts on coping during the pandemic. We will follow up with these links and resources in the next couple of days. Look in your email inbox and we will send that information, a little recap of what was discussed tonight, and links to the video, which has been recorded and will be available also. Let's see, I just want to take a quick second to talk about a couple of upcoming events. On March 31st, Parent Chat, the topic is going to be on body image and healthy eating habits with Coach Sherry, who is the usual facilitator of these parent chats, and Becky Manley from the Multi-Service Eating Disorders. So that's March 31st. Spread the word, help us get the word out if you know someone who might be interested in that topic. And the next one on March 9th, I guess these are out of order, but March 9th, Lake Washington High School PTSA is going to be presenting with Balance in Mind, What You Need to Know series on teens, marijuana, vaping, and street drugs. And this is going to be a community forum following up on those important topics. If you're interested in these events and you want to keep track of what we're doing, you can follow us on Facebook at Balance in Mind. There, you can look for us there. One last thing before you go, if you don't mind, we've got a couple really quick polls that'll help us get a quick feedback on how we're doing. If you can take a second to fill these out, we would sure appreciate it. So the first one is just a quick, how helpful was tonight's parent chat? And the second one, wait a second, I'm sorry, folks. Let's do that again. That's the wrong one. I'm new to polls. This is the one. The first one is how helpful was tonight's parent chat, and the second one is what city do you live in? This is helping us get a little bit of a sense of where our audience is coming from. So if you could let us know that, that would be helpful to us as well. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. We hope you've heard something this evening that will help you make a positive step toward improving the emotional health in your family and cope with all the things that all of us are dealing with as we slog through the last bit, hopefully, of this pandemic. So again, thanks for being here, and take care, everybody. Good night.